Picture this: 3 days into a sun-scorched desert, your lips cracked, throat parched, feet dragging through sand that whispers death. The Israelites had just witnessed the impossible: walls of water collapsing on Pharaoh's army, their sandals sloshing through a seabed turned highway. But now, no miracles here. Just a crowd of desperate exiles, squinting at the horizon, praying for a sip of water. When they finally find a spring at Marah, it's undrinkable, bitter. The word itself tastes like betrayal. Murmurs ripple through the camp. What are we supposed to drink? Moses, caught between a dehydrated mob and the God who just parted a sea, does the only thing he can. He cries out. And in that moment, Yahweh doesn't just answer, he reveals. A piece of wood tossed into the bitter waters turns them sweet. But the real miracle isn't the fix, it's the promise that follows. If you listen carefully to the Lord your God and do what is right in his eyes, I will not bring on you any of the diseases I brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. Exodus 15 verse 26. This verse isn't a footnote. It's a seismic shift in how we understand God's heart. Yet, somewhere between ancient deserts and modern pews, this law, this covenant of health, has been buried under centuries of tradition, skepticism, and half-truths. What if this forgotten key isn't about rule-keeping, but relationship? What if sickness isn't just a biological battle, but a spiritual one, and God's ancient blueprint still holds power? Let's dig. The story starts with thirst, but pivots to revelation. After the water crisis, God doesn't just say, "Here's your water, good luck out there." He drops a bombshell. I am Yahweh, Rapha, the God who heals you. The Hebrew Rapha means to mend, cure, or repair thoroughly. It's not a quick fix, it's an identity statement. God isn't just a healer, he's your healer. But notice the condition: if you listen and do what is right. Wait, is God bargaining here? Obey me, and I'll spare you sickness? That sounds transactional, almost cold. But look closer. The Israelites had just been freed from Egypt, a place where gods were appeased with rituals and superstition. Yahweh's covenant was different. He wasn't demanding perfection. He was inviting them into trust. The statutes and decrees he mentions weren't arbitrary rules. They were lifelines, guidance on food, hygiene, community care, and worship. For example, laws about quarantining the sick, Leviticus 13, or avoiding contaminated food, Deuteronomy 14, weren't just ancient health codes. They were divine wisdom, protecting a people who didn't understand germs or viruses. Obedience wasn't about earning favor. It was about aligning with the Creator's design for flourishing. Let's cut through the noise. When God says, "If you listen, I will not bring on you the diseases I brought on the Egyptians," it's easy to hear a transactional ultimatum. Do this, get that. But that's like calling a marriage license a business contract. You're missing the poetry, the heart, the story. Here's the radical truth buried in Exodus 15:26. God wasn't imposing rules. He was proposing relationship. In the ancient Near East, gods were tyrants. They demanded sacrifices to curb their tantrums. If you forgot an offering, they'd smite your crops or curse your kids. But Yahweh flips the script. His covenant isn't about appeasement. It's about belonging. The Hebrew word for listen here, shama, isn't passive hearing. It's attentive, intimate obedience, like a child leaning into a parent's whisper, like a lover memorizing the cadence of a beloved's voice. This wasn't a dictator's decree. It was a father's plea. Stay close to me, and I'll protect you. But why the focus on disease? Let's zoom out. Egypt was a spiritual minefield. Their pantheon included Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of plague, and Serapis, the god of healing, deities who'd inflict sickness, then demand worship for cures. Pharaoh himself was considered a living god, a divine intermediary. So when Yahweh says, "I am the Lord who heals you," he's not just making a promise, he's declaring war. He's saying, those gods you feared in Egypt, they're frauds. I'm the source, I'm the remedy, and I'm not for sale. The statutes and decrees he gives Israel weren't arbitrary hoops to jump through. They were guardrails for freedom. Take the dietary laws, Leviticus 11. Forbidding pork and shellfish wasn't about divine pickiness. In a pre-refrigeration era, those foods spoiled quickly, breeding parasites and disease. Or consider the quarantine protocols. Leviticus 13. Isolating the sick wasn't about stigma, it was about stopping outbreaks. These weren't restrictions, they were rescue missions. God wasn't withholding fun. He was preserving a people who'd become a kingdom of priests. Exodus 19 verse 6. But here's where we've misunderstood the covenant. It wasn't conditional on flawless performance. Covenants in the ancient world were binding, but Yahweh's had a grace clause. When Israel inevitably messed up, worshiping golden calves, griping about manna, doubting at the edge of the promised land, God didn't void the contract. He sent prophets, not invoices. He disciplined, but he never disowned. Why? Because the covenant was rooted in his character, not theirs. I am the Lord who heals you isn't a title he earns, it's who he is. Fast forward to the Gospels. Jesus strolls into a broken world, and the religious leaders are furious because he heals on the Sabbath. But Christ isn't breaking the law, he's fulfilling it. The Sabbath was meant to symbolize rest, wholeness, and liberation. And here's the living covenant, setting a bent woman free. When he touches lepers and resurrects Lazarus in John 11, he's not just doing miracles. He's shouting, "The God of Exodus 15:26 is still here. The covenant holds." Yet, the ultimate twist comes at the cross. Jesus, the sinless Son, takes on the full curse of the covenant, the disease of sin, the bitterness of death, so we could inherit its blessings. Paul later writes, "Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us." Galatians 3:13. In other words, the healing promised to Israel is now ours, not because we've kept the rules, but because he took our penalty. The covenant is signed in his blood. So why do believers still get sick? Here's the tension. We live in the already but not yet. The cross secured our healing, but we're still in a war zone. Sickness, like sin, is a trespasser in God's world. Yet every time we pray for healing, every time we fight for wholeness, we're not begging a reluctant God. We're enforcing a finished work. We're declaring, this body, this mind, this world belongs to Yahweh Rapha. The trespasser must leave. The forgotten law isn't a magic formula. It's a love letter. It's God saying, I know the way home. Walk it with me. When we do, we're not earning anything. We're stepping into a rhythm older than Eden. A rhythm where breath comes easy, where cells align with life, where sickness loses its license to linger. The healing covenant isn't buried in the past. It's alive, and it's yours. So how does this play out now? Let's ditch the checkbox mentality. Obedience isn't about earning healing. It's about partnering with God's heart. Here's the kicker. Sickness hates alignment with heaven. When we live in God's rhythm, forgiving, stewarding our bodies, praying without ceasing, we create an environment where disease struggles to thrive. Think of it like light and darkness. You don't fight darkness. You turn on a light. Similarly, walking in God's ways exposes sickness's illegitimacy. James 5:14 and 15 ties healing to confession and prayer, echoing Exodus's link between wholeness and covenant living. But what about when prayers aren't answered? This is where faith meets mystery. We live in a fallen world. Bodies age, genetics play a role, and spiritual warfare rages. Yet even in suffering, the covenant holds. Paul's thorn in the flesh, 2 Corinthians 12 verses 7 to 10, reminds us that God's grace is sufficient, and his power shines in weakness. Healing isn't just physical, it's the soul's anchor in God's goodness, no matter the storm. Let's return to that desert moment, where a piece of wood transformed bitterness into sweetness. It's easy to see the miracle at Marah as a one-time fix, a divine band-aid for a thirsty crowd. But what if that wooden branch Moses tossed into the water was more than a quick solution? What if it was a signpost pointing to a greater story, one that stretches all the way to a hill called Golgotha? Here's the thing. The Israelites didn't earn that miracle. They were exhausted, complaining, and faithless. Yet God, in his mercy, met them in their mess. That piece of wood wasn't just a tool. It was a symbol of grace. Fast forward a few millennia, And another piece of wood, the cross, would plunge into the bitterness of humanity's brokenness, turning our despair into hope, our death into life. Jesus, hanging on that tree, became the ultimate answer to every Mara moment we'll ever face. He didn't just sweeten our circumstances, he rewrote our destiny. This is the heartbeat of Exodus 15:26. God's promise, "I am the Lord who heals you," isn't a rigid contract dependent on our perfection. It's a covenant, a binding agreement rooted in his unchanging character. Covenants aren't like pinky promises. They're unbreakable, even when we falter. Think of a parent teaching a child to walk. The child stumbles, doubts, even rebels, but the parent's grip never loosens. That's the kind of God we're dealing with. His healing isn't a reward for good behavior. It's the natural overflow of walking hand in hand with him. So what does this walk look like today? It's not about ticking religious boxes. It's about leaning into rhythms that align us with heaven's frequency. Prayer becomes less about reciting wishes and more about tuning our hearts to his voice. Obedience shifts from duty to devotion, a yes whispered not out of fear, but trust. Even our struggles take on new meaning. When we forgive, we dismantle bitterness. When we steward our bodies and minds, we honor the temple of the Spirit. When we fight for justice, we mirror God's heart for restoration. This isn't a self-help plan. It's a rebellion against the chaos of a broken world. Sickness, in all its forms, thrives in isolation and despair, but it crumbles in the presence of a people rooted in covenant love. Yet, let's be honest, sometimes prayers for healing feel like they hit the ceiling. We've all stood by hospital beds or wept over graves, wondering why the miracle didn't come. Here's where the story gets deeper. The covenant isn't a guarantee against pain. It's the promise that no matter what, God remains our healer. Sometimes he calms the storm. Other times he calms us in the storm. Paul's thorn in the flesh wasn't removed, but in that weakness, he discovered a strength beyond himself, a grace that turned his limp into a testimony. Healing isn't just about the body. It's the soul finding peace in the middle of the ache, the mind resting in truths deeper than circumstances. This is why the story of Mara isn't over. Every time we choose trust over fear, worship over worry, love over bitterness, we're throwing another piece of wood into the waters of this world. We're declaring that the God of Exodus is still rewriting endings. And here's the kicker. We're not alone in this. The wilderness journey was never meant to be solo. The Israelites moved as a community, grumbling together, hoping together, learning together. When one stumbled, another carried them. When the water turned sweet, they all drank. Today, we heal in the context of us, not me. The church isn't a club of perfect people. It's a ragtag family binding each other's wounds, reminding one another of the covenant, and holding up the weary arms of those still waiting for their miracle. So, here's the invitation. Step into the story. The desert you're walking through, the diagnosis, the depression, the doubt, is not your forever home. Yahweh Rapha is still turning bitter to sweet. Sometimes it happens in a flash, like water pouring from a rock. Other times, it's a slow drip, like manna appearing day by day. But every act of faith, no matter how small, is a declaration that sickness doesn't get the last word. The cross proved that. Jesus' resurrection was the ultimate wood in the water, a cosmic reset where death itself was swallowed by life. Because of that, healing isn't just a possibility. It's a guaranteed finale. Whether we see it now or in eternity, the covenant holds. So keep walking, keep trusting, keep throwing your wood into the bitter places. The healer of Exodus is still here, not just with answers, but with arms open wide. The desert doesn't get the last word. Yahweh Rapha does, and his last word over you is life.